Welcome back to AERO 1020, Theory of Flight, presentation number 13 on stalls and spins. An airplane can stall when the angle of attack reaches the critical angle of attack. That's an important point to remember. The critical angle of attack can be reached at any flight attitude, meaning that the airplane can stall while it's climbing or while it's descending. In a turn, when you're banking an airplane, some of the vertical lift that was keeping the airplane aloft is diverted or changed into horizontal lift. That's what actually turns the airplane. So to maintain altitude, because you've lost some of that vertical lift, it's necessary to increase the angle of attack. You have to pull back on the yoke, increase the pitch to maintain altitude when the airplane is banked. That increases the load factor imposed on the wing. If you are in straight and level flight, then you are imposing 1g of load on the wings. 1g is equal to the pull of gravity. So let's ask a question. The angle of attack at which an airplane wing stalls will A, increase if the CG is moved forward, B, change with an increase in gross weight, or C, remain the same regardless of gross weight. So is the angle of attack going to change based on any of these factors? The answer is no. It'll remain the same regardless of gross weight. So the critical angle of attack doesn't change based on weight. It doesn't change based on the CG. It's always the same. What does change, though, is the stall speed. The stall speed can increase as a result of weight and also as a result of load factor. So you can see in this illustration an aircraft starting to bank, and as it starts to bank, some of that vertical lift supporting the aircraft in the air is transferred or changed into horizontal lift. That horizontal lift pulls the airplane in the direction of the horizontal lift. The total lift, or the resultant lift, is what contributes to the load factor. Load factor is the ratio between the resultant lift, or the total lift, and the aircraft's weight. So let's look at this load factor chart. You can see at an angle of attack of 45 degrees, the load factor is 1.5 Gs. If we calculate the load on the wings of this aircraft in a 45-degree bank, the load being supported is 6,750 pounds. What happens if we were to increase that to a 60-degree bank? Now the load factor is 2 Gs. So the airplane is supporting twice its weight. So here's another question. During an approach to a stall, an increased load factor will cause the airplane to A, stall at a higher airspeed, B, have a tendency to spin, or C, be more difficult to control. And the answer is stall at a higher airspeed. Remember that an increase in load factor will result in an increase in the stall speed. It increases in proportion to the square root of the load factor. So with a load factor of 4, an aircraft will stall at a speed which is double the normal stall speed. See in this illustration 3 airfoils at differing angles of attack. At a small angle of attack on the left, you see that the separation of the airflow starts at the trailing edge of the wing. And then as the angle of attack increases, that separation starts to move closer to the leading edge of the airfoil. And then finally, at the critical angle of attack, the flow of air separates over almost the entire length from the leading edge to the trailing edge, and the wing stalls. In our previous discussion about wing planforms, we looked at the different types of wing planforms and the differing stall characteristics. And we came to the conclusion that the rectangular wing had the most favorable stall characteristics because the stall begins at the inboard section of the wing and then moves out toward the wingtips. And that leaves the aileron more effective for a longer time period, allowing the pilot to control the airplane better before an impending stall. But notice that the stalls in all of these wing planforms begin on the trailing edge and then move forward to the leading edge of the wing. We've also discussed the term wing washout in prior discussions. And remember the term angle of incidence? Angle of incidence is the angle between the chord line of the airfoil and the longitudinal axis of the airplane. And that's fixed. The pilot can't change the angle of incidence. A wing washout is the difference between the angle of incidence at the wing root and the angle of incidence at the wing tip. So wing washout is when the wing is twisted so that the angle of incidence at the root is greater than the angle of incidence at the wingtip. And that will allow the root of the wing to stall or reach the critical angle of attack before the wingtip, and that will leave the aileron effective for a longer period of time, giving the pilot more control during the progression of a stall. The Cirrus SR-22 is designed with a wing that is cuffed. As you can see in this picture, the wing actually has two different sections, the inboard section and the outboard section. If you look carefully at the wing from the side of the aircraft, you'll see that the section of the wing closest to the wingtip is at a lower angle of attack than the section of the wing closer to the wing root. Again, this is so that the wing will stall first at the wing root and leave the aileron effective for a longer period of time, which gives the pilot more control over the aircraft during the progression of a stall. And again, this is called wing washout. You can actually say wing washout at work in this picture. Small pieces of yarn have been attached to the wing from the wing root to the wing tip. And the wing is at a high angle of attack, and you can actually see that the air is getting turbulent at the wing root, but not so much at the wing tip. So remember, a wing will stall at the critical angle of attack, and that's typically somewhere between 15 and 17 degrees of nose-up pitch on most general aviation aircraft. You can see that in this graph. It's important to remember that the wing will stall at the critical angle of attack, but it will stall at a different airspeed depending on the load factor. The higher the load factor, the higher the stall speed. So an aircraft can stall above the stall speeds VS1 or VSO depending on the load factor. Remember, VS1 and VSO assume 1G level flight. If you are in more than 1G level flight, for example, in a 60-degree bank, you have 2 Gs on the airplane, and your stall speed will increase by about 40%. So whenever the wing exceeds the critical angle of attack, it will stall. If it stalls above the posted stall speeds, VSO, VS1, what is that stall called? It's called an accelerated stall. Most general aviation aircraft are equipped with some sort of a stall warning system. On the left side, you see an aircraft with a stall tab installed on the leading edge of the wing. As the aircraft is pitched up closer to the critical angle of attack, the stagnation point moves and forces this tab up, which completes a circuit and causes a warning sound or a horn to sound in the cockpit, warning the pilot that the aircraft is close to the critical angle of attack. On the right side of this slide, you see an aircraft equipped with a stall warning hole. And that works much the same as the stall warning tab. What happens is as the aircraft nose pitch is increased closer to the critical angle of attack, the stagnation point, of course, moves, and that changes the pressure inside of this stall warning hole. That completes a circuit which activates a warning horn in the cockpit, telling the pilot that the aircraft is close to the critical angle of attack. In addition to wing washout, we can also encourage the inboard section of the wing to stall before the outboard section by installing one of these on the leading edge, closer to the wing root. These are called stall strips. Here's an excellent video about stalls, how stalls develop, and how to recover from a stall. After the video, we'll return to continue our discussion about spins.
This chart is plotting the coefficient of lift of a particular wing as its angle of attack increases. Lift will continue to increase until a certain angle of attack, called the critical angle of attack. After this point, the wings still create lift, but the amount of lift created is decreased. This is called a stall. When some people think of the word stall, they think about the engine stalling. However, we are talking about an aerodynamic stall, which has nothing to do with the engine. Stalls happen when the normally smooth airflow over the wing separates from the wing's upper surface, resulting in a turbulent airflow. The parts of the wing that have turbulent airflow passing around them are not producing any lift. For a given airplane, a stall will always occur at the same angle of attack, the critical angle of attack, regardless of its airspeed, attitude, or weight. Here's a wing at normal cruise angle of attack, something small like 4 or 5 degrees. Increasing the angle of attack will progressively cause more and more disruption of the airflow on the upper surface of the wing. Early on, the airflow will separate at the trailing edge. As the angle of attack increases, the separation of the airflow moves from the trailing edge of the wing to the leading edge. As this separation occurs, the airflow will become more and more turbulent, and less lift gets generated. Different airplanes will exhibit different stall characteristics, but generally coincide with mushy, sluggish flight control responses, a stall warning horn, a buffeting or shaking feeling of the airplane and pilot's controls, and once the stall occurs, the aircraft's nose will pitch down and the aircraft will begin losing altitude. Since the stall is a result of an excessive angle of attack, the only way to recover from a stall is to reduce the angle of attack below the critical angle. Power should be added to minimize the amount of altitude lost in the recovery and increase the airplane's speed as quickly as possible.
Now that we understand stalls and how a stall occurs, we can move on to discuss spins. And it's important to remember that a spin is a result of both wings being stalled. It's just that one wing is stalled more than the other. And we'll discuss how that occurs, but what happens as the aircraft approaches a critical angle of attack and one wing actually yaws and will roll, that wing will be in a greater stall condition and will begin a rotation, which it develops into a spin. If the spin is allowed to fully develop, then the aircraft begins a spiral toward the ground, where the airplane is rapidly descending. To recover from a spin, the first thing you need to do is reduce the throttle to idle. If you don't reduce the throttle to idle, you'll just aggravate the spin. Once the throttle is reduced to idle, then you apply rudder in the opposite direction of the spin. So if the airplane is spinning to the left, apply full right rudder. By applying opposite rudder, you'll stop the rotation. Once the rotation stops, you should reduce the angle of attack to reestablish the flow of air over the wings and reestablish lift. Once you've done that, then you can slowly pull back on the nose pitch to resume level flight. So what should a pilot do to stop the spin? A. Add power, then pull the nose up. B. Reduce power, then push the nose down. C. Reduce power, apply rudder opposite the spin, and then release back pressure? The answer is C. Reduce the power, apply opposite rudder to stop the spin, and then release the back pressure to let the nose pitch down to reestablish lift. That's the end of presentation 13 on stalls and spins. Next presentation, number 14, will be on stability and control.